Tonight on Nation to Nation, the head of the First Nations Chiefs of Police Association says Ottawa is not living up to its commitments when it comes to funding them.
And it ultimately puts the safety of our citizens and our communities that we serve in jeopardy.
First Nations housing should not be left up to the federal government, says this expert.
We know that what doesn't work is when it's government-led program development and deliveries.
Northern Manitoba MP Nikki Ashton says nursing stations in First Nations are in crisis.
That there was not one day that went by where nursing stations were properly staffed. That's just not acceptable. The federal government has a responsibility. Lives are on the line.
Welcome to Nation to Nation. I'm Fraser Needham. The Trudeau government has said First Nations policing is a priority, but those working in the field say the government's actions don't meet its words. First Nations police forces accuse Ottawa of chronic underfunding, and they continue to push the government to legislate First Nations policing as an essential service. Here today to talk about these and other issues is the president of the First Nations Chiefs of Police Association, Gerald Swamp. Mr. Swamp, thank you for joining Nation to Nation.
You're welcome. Good to be here.
All right, well, maybe we'll start off first about the human rights complaint that First Nations police forces have launched against the federal government. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
The Indigenous Police Services of Ontario, there's 9 standalone police services in Ontario, and we've been finding that there's been discriminatory conduct in regards to how First Nation police services are funded and resourced. And this has been going on for years, and we've at the First Nation Chiefs of Police Association in 2017, we passed a motion asking and requiring Canada to make First Nation Police Service an essential service. And Prime Minister Trudeau had mandated Minister Blair in 2018 to make sure that First Nation Police Services are classified as essential services and to pass legislation. And we're 3 years later and that hasn't come to fruition.
Yeah, maybe you can just give me a bit of an example about it. It sounds like sort of a chronic underfunding situation from what I understand. So how is this specifically affecting the services that you can provide?
First Nation Police Services in Canada are funded under a program, which means that we're funded at discretionary funding. So if there's a lack of funding, they can cut the funding from our police services at any time. And because it's under a program, we are limited to 3 to 5 years, if that, of policing agreements. So how can we conduct any strategic planning or even provide safety and security to a police officer who wants to come into our service for longevity? We can't promise them a career into our police services when we're funded for 3 years at a time. So the instability of our services creates a lot of retention issues.
Okay, and in the past, as you know, these First Nations communities were largely served by either the RCMP or provincial police forces. Why do you think it's critical that they now be served by First Nations police forces?
First Nation police services, when you talk about community policing, we give a true meaning to the community policing in our services. We come from the community, we know the community, and we live in the community. Many of our officers are from the community that we serve. So we know the culture, we know the traditions, and we know the languages. So when you relate to somebody in the community who, first of all, has a mistrust of policing because of the multi-generational issues that policing brings in, it's a lot more conducive for a First Nation police services to walk into the house and communicate in the language and know the customs. Many of our services have still have followed the teachings that we have and for generations, such as death rights. So as a traditional person coming in and doing the policing, there's steps that need to be taken when somebody dies that we acknowledge and we understand. So we provide that true community policing.
Okay, and you mentioned it a little bit before, but you've been pushing the government to pass legislation that makes First Nations policing an essential service. Why is this necessary in your view?
Currently, our First Nation officers don't have the equity that every other police officer in Canada has. We are lower in pay scale. We don't have the same pension benefits. We don't have the same longevity of our contracts and our funding agreements. So that creates issues of recruitment and retention. There's many young people that want to get into policing, and First Nation policing just isn't as advertising or isn't as good as other services when it comes to those types of benefits. So,
right. So it's you want to put your police service on an equal scale, I guess, with other police forces in Canada.
Well, there's been several court decisions that have said that. The recent one in Quebec, Court of Appeals, that said that First Nation police services should be funded and resourced considerably to the same standard as a neighboring police service. So if you consider that, First Nation police services should be to the same standard as a municipal police service or a provincial police services that's policing the neighboring community nearby. And we don't have that because we're funded for frontline officers. The terms and conditions in our funding agreements limit us for specialized services such as drug units, canine units, forensic units. When we have higher violent crime rates in our communities, we need these sort of things. We need to have those specialized units to provide that safety and security for our communities.
Okay, well, I think we're going to have to leave it there for time constraints, but I know you're very busy, so thanks once again for joining us today, Mr. Swamp.
Thank you very much.
After these messages, we'll talk to Ontario Aboriginal Housing Services CEO Justin Marchand about where the federal government is at in terms of an urban Indigenous housing strategy. Welcome back. It's well known that Indigenous people sometimes live in deplorable housing conditions. For example, this house on Lake Babine First Nation in British Columbia shows what people have to live with. In last month's federal budget, the Liberals pledged $4 billion over 7 years for an urban, rural, and northern Indigenous housing strategy. But critics say not only is it not enough, but the government is not moving quickly enough to address the growing gap. Here today to talk to us about some of these challenges is Justin Marchand, the CEO of Aboriginal Housing Services. Mr. Marchand, welcome to Nation to Nation.
Miigwech for having us today, Fraser.
I guess we'll start off with just how exactly dire is the housing situation for Indigenous people living in urban centres right now?
Well, we know that in Ontario right now, as of today, we need 22,000 new units. So that roughly translates to about 80,000 Indigenous people in urban rural areas of Ontario that don't have access to safe, affordable housing today.
Okay, and I know you serve a lot of different people in a lot of different sort of urban centres and different centres of the province, but could you maybe just give me an example of a typical person that contacts your office and what are you able to address their needs right now?
Sure. Right now we have over 7,000 applicants on our wait list, and we certainly don't have to, unfortunately, don't have to promote that wait list because of the need is so high. In terms of what a typical applicant might look like, there's certainly people in very unique circumstances. Really, every individual that applies is in a unique circumstance, but I'll give you a couple examples. Might be a mother-led household who's escaping a situation of violence that has 2, 3, 4 children and needs a place to stay. We have people on our wait list who are in that situation that are living with their children in their vehicles. Another situation might be a younger person who is exiting the so-called child care system or youth care system that doesn't have a place to live, and they are on the streets right now, or they're couch surfing with friends or family or acquaintances, which is not always a safe thing to do for a young person. Or it could be an elder or senior who doesn't have the income level of income needed at retirement age to be able to afford a decent place to live. So there's really people in all different kinds of situations. It could also be individuals who are working in jobs that are low to middle income, that are working 40 plus hours a week, but can't afford market rents in the situation that we're in right now.
Okay, and as you know, this year's budget puts $4 billion over 7 years toward co-developing a northern, rural, and urban Indigenous housing strategy. Is this necessary, though? Groups like yours have been working on this type of thing for years. Does such a strategy already exist?
So yes, we have strategies that have been built in Ontario and BC, and we are in the phase right now of basically rolling that strategy out up right across these lands. Minister Hussein's, you mentioned $4 billion. Minister Hussein's own National Housing Council has called for $6.2 billion per year over 10 years. They've called for $62 billion. This is Minister Hussein's own experts that have looked at the numbers, and they're calling for that massive investment. So $4 billion, well, it's certainly a start. It's a long way from what the actual need is. And further to that, Minister Hussein's National Housing Council called for that investment to begin immediately. The budget that was released last month is calling for that $4 billion to not begin for another 2 years yet, and then be spread over 7 years. So we're in the middle of a housing and homelessness crisis right now. We need help right now.
Okay, and also from what we understand is last year's budget also gave $300 million to the Canada Housing and Mortgage Corporation to co-develop what sounds to be a similar strategy. Is this overlap? And also, is CHMC the right organization to be handling such a strategy like this?
We think an urban, rural, northern Indigenous housing strategy should be written and built and administered by Indigenous people that are living in urban, rural, and northern areas. This is not something that we think should be a government-led initiative. We know that when Indigenous people lead the development and administration of programs and services that affect their lives, that we have great success. And we know that what doesn't work is when it's government-led program development and delivery. So we absolutely think that it should not be CMHC leading this. It should be urban, rural, northern people, Indigenous people that live in those areas.
Okay, and aside from the money, we know that's a big shortfall. I mean, everyone says $4 billion doesn't really go anywhere near addressing the need. But aside from that, what are some of the other obstacles that are really, you think, getting in the way of providing Indigenous people with the housing that they need in urban centers?
So one of our most significant barriers is access to suitable land. And when we're looking in urban and rural areas, when we're dealing with a colonial titles system, and that means we often have to work with either municipalities or, quote, private landowners. So as of right now, governments don't fund the acquisition of, again, quote, privately owned land. So that is absolutely an obstacle. And secondly, municipalities sometimes have some land ownership holdings, but certainly not to the level that's needed to build the amount of housing that's required right now.
Okay, well, we're going to have to leave it there for time constraints. But once again, thank you very much for joining us today, Mr. Marchand.
Bewitched, Fraser.
When we come back, we'll talk to NDP MP Nikki Ashton about critical nursing shortages in Northern First Nations communities. Welcome back. Critical nursing shortages continue to be a problem in the First Nations communities that rely on Indigenous Services Canada to fill those jobs. According to the government, nursing stations are consistently operating under capacity because about 33% of nursing positions remain unfilled. Here today to talk about this problem is Northern Manitoba NDP MP Nikki Ashton. Welcome to Nation to Nation, Miss Ashton.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Right, so I'll start right into the issue of nursing shortages in remote communities, many of which you serve, and Indigenous as well. And I guess how serious is the nursing shortage in the communities that Indigenous Services Canada serves right now?
This shortage is putting lives on the line. The chief of God's River talked about a 37-year-old woman who repeatedly went to the nursing station seeking help and went on to die at home alone without the help, obviously, that was required. And we, what we said very clearly is that, these kinds of incidents, these tragedies are tied in to the reality in nursing stations, the lack of capacity, the burnout that nurses are facing. And ultimately, the buck stops with the federal government. The federal government has responsibility, including contractual responsibilities, to make sure that nursing stations are adequately staffed. We all know that during the pandemic, there were a lot of ups and downs. We've coming out of the pandemic, we are very concerned that the federal government is not taking this issue seriously. And in fact, we also were able to find out some information from the federal government that indicated that over the last couple of months in Manitoba and Ontario, for example, which includes, of course, our area, that there was not one day that went by where nursing stations were properly staffed. That's just not acceptable. The federal government has a responsibility. Lives are on the line. We need to make sure that nursing stations have the staff, that nurses are there the way that communities need them.
And maybe you fully, I'm sure, know about this, but some of our other viewers might not know that some of these people that are living in these remote communities, if they can't get care at the point of access, what are some of the real challenges that they might have to face if to go somewhere else?
Mm-hmm. Well, the situation is even more acute in flyin remote First Nations, for whom the nursing station is the only place they can go to get medical help. And so, if you get to the nursing station and there's only one nurse on at that time, and they can't see you right now, you have to wait until they can. Right. And if the situation is very serious, that becomes a real problem. First of all, people can't just jump in their vehicle and drive to the nearest hospital or health center to be looked at. They live in a fly-in community. The prices of an airline ticket are astronomical. And also, if you can't also be approved to be flown out through a medevac unless you're patched into a doctor, whether they're on call or maybe in the community, which is not particularly reliable for a lot of these communities. And so essentially the nursing station is the only place in the community where you can get help. And that's why when they're improperly staffed or not staffed at all, we've also heard horror stories of no nurses being available to staff the First Nation nursing station. You're in a very precarious situation. And as we heard from the leadership, a lot of that pressure falls back on chiefs, councils, community leaders left to figure out, how they can get help for their community members to get out and get the adequate health care that they need.
Okay, and I also note from just looking at some of the information that not only are these positions not being full capacity, but a lot of them are being contracted out to private companies. Is that cause for concern?
It is, absolutely. And, and those of us that live here in the north, we know that increasingly a lot of our health centers, even hospitals, are relying on agency nurses and agency staffing. This is problematic, and I want to acknowledge the important work that so many of these nurses do in our communities. But the reality is that the model, that the system is broken. The federal government should be ensuring that health is being made available for public good, not for profit for these agency companies. The federal government should make sure that nurses are that they want to work with the federal government. We've heard certainly problems around flexibility, remuneration, schedules. The federal government should be coming to the table with healthcare workers to find ways to make sure that they're able to do this work, that they are supported in doing this work, and fundamentally First Nations communities are getting the services that they deserve. Right now, that's clearly not happening. I mean, a big question as well, which we are looking into, is how much is the federal government spending on agency nurses, on agency companies, I would say, most importantly, rather than investing that money into making the federal system stronger and ensuring that communities have access to federally funded nurses and healthcare services at the community level the way they deserve.
World Cup is coming up to this part of the world, and I guess about 3 years from now, and you're really calling on the NDP is really calling on the federal government to step up its funding of soccer programming in northern Indigenous communities, from what I understand.
Yes, absolutely. The fact that Canada is co-hosting the Men's World Cup, this is the single largest sporting event in the world in 2026, is nothing short of historic. It's a big deal for this to come to Canada. And this is an opportunity to showcase, the power of soccer here in our own country. And Fraser, I'm very proud to represent a number of communities here in Northern Manitoba, First Nations, that have a long history with soccer. And let's not forget, this is one of the most affordable sports one can play. We all love hockey, but we know that hockey has become increasingly expensive. Soccer is a very affordable sport. It's an inclusive sport, and it's a sport that's gaining a lot of momentum. We know that it's the fastest growing sport in Canada right now, and we're seeing incredible momentum here in our northern communities. We're seeing real excitement amongst the little ones, and particularly, and I know this from my own kids, watching Canada score their first goal in the last World Cup that just happened a few months ago. Canada's on the map, and we need to make sure that as we host a national event like the World Cup, that we're also showcasing the power of soccer across the country. And that means showcasing it and supporting it in northern and Indigenous communities. And that's why we're calling on the federal government, as well as FIFA, which is the International Soccer Federation, to fund and invest in junior soccer in Indigenous and northern communities.
Okay, well, it certainly should be an exciting time. I know that both the men's and women's teams have really come up in recent years in soccer, and so with this added component, it would be interesting to see. But unfortunately, we're going to have to leave it there. But as always, it's a pleasure, and thanks for joining us today, Ms. Ashton.
Thank you very much, Fraser. It was a pleasure as well.
This wraps up this week's episode of Nation and Nation. If you missed any part of tonight's show, you can check out our podcast at aptnnews.ca/podcast. I'm Fraser Needham. Good night.